You own a Formula One team. Champagne on the podium, a car with your name on the nose, global broadcast every other weekend to hundreds of millions of viewers. Now the real number? Of the 3 teams that entered the sport promising a new, affordable era in 2010, 0 survived past 2017. Here is what this actually costs. Before you build a single car, the FIA charges an anti-dilution fee just to add an 11th seat at the table. Under the current Concord agreement, that fee is set at $200 million, though General Motors reportedly agreed to pay closer to $450 million to bring Cadillac onto the 2026 grid, split among the 10 existing teams as compensation for a smaller slice of prize money. That fee buys you nothing on track. It's purely the cost of admission, negotiated with rivals who have every incentive to price you out. Then comes the actual operation. A factory, a wind tunnel or CFD allowance, and a workforce large enough to design, build, and race a car within the FIA's technical rules. Even before spending $1 on development, you're bound by the season's cost cap, $135 million for 2024 and 2025, meaning your entire first year of racing has to fit inside that number by regulation, not by choice. Add facility build-out, simulator infrastructure, and preseason hiring, and a realistic all-in figure to reach the grid, with a competitive package easily clears $400 million before a single point is scored. Not the glamorous number teams put in press releases. The real one. Start with the cost cap itself, $135 million as a base for 2024 and 2025, adjusted upward for inflation and for any race beyond the base calendar of 21. $1.8 million per extra race, which on a 24-race calendar adds $5.4 million. Pushing the effective 2025 number to roughly $140.4 million. That figure covers car design, production, and race operations, including the salaries of the several hundred engineers, mechanics, and support staff a competitive team employs. Everyone except the 3 highest-paid people in the organization and the drivers themselves. It does not cover everything. Driver salaries sit outside the cap entirely. A top driver can command anywhere from the low millions to over $50 million a year, money that comes straight out of the team's actual cash flow with no ceiling at all. Marketing spend, hospitality, and the salaries of the team's 3 highest-paid executives are also excluded from the cap by rule. If the team isn't a manufacturer building its own power unit, it's paying a customer engine supply contract on top of the chassis cap. If it is a manufacturer, the engine program runs under a separate cap of its own, $95 million a year from 2022 through 2025, rising to $130 million from 2026 as new hybrid regulations take effect. Add it up: chassis cap, engine program, driver salaries, marketing, and leadership pay outside the cap. And a team's true annual cash outflow routinely runs $160 million to $220 million, well past the headline number regulators publish. Freight, travel, and logistics for a 24-race global calendar add further pressure inside that same capped chassis budget, since shipping cars, spares, and equipment to every continent multiple times a season is not cheap and is not exempted from the cost cap the way driver pay is. Now the money side. Formula One's total commercial revenue reached roughly $3.65 billion in 2024, and teams collectively received about $1.266 billion of that as prize money. But it isn't split evenly. McLaren, winning the Constructors' Championship, earned an estimated $140 to $161 million. Sauber, finishing dead last, took home roughly $60 to $70 million, a gap of nearly $100 million between first and 10th, for doing the same job of fielding 2 cars all season. Analysts estimate the step between adjacent finishing positions at around $8.55 million per place, based on 2024's payment structure. Multiply a bottom-tier team's prize money by its actual costs and the math turns ugly fast. $65 million in prize money plus, generously, $70 million in sponsorship revenue gives you $135 million against a cost base of $150 million or more once the cap, driver pay, and marketing are counted. Net result for the team fighting to stay off the back row, a loss, not a thin profit, before a single unplanned expense hits the ledger. And unlike most businesses, this team can't simply raise prices or cut a product line to fix it. The entire revenue side of the equation is fixed months in advance by where the cars finish on Sunday, race after race, with no mid-season repricing available at all. That loss for the bottom teams isn't a rounding error. It's the design of the system. And there's a mechanism that makes it self-reinforcing, one that turns a single bad season into a downward spiral that's genuinely difficult to escape. The mechanism is sponsorship, tied directly to finishing position and television exposure. A team that finishes near the back gets less camera time, fewer highlight packages, and a materially weaker pitch to sponsors renewing multi-year deals, which lowers next season's revenue, which lowers the development budget, which tends to produce another poor finish. This exact cycle played out across an entire generation of teams. 3 new outfits joined the grid in 2010: Virgin Racing, Lotus Racing, and HRT, enticed partly by a proposed $40 million budget cap that would have leveled the field against manufacturers spending well over $300 million a year, roughly 10 times what the new entrants were told they'd need to compete. The FIA abandoned that plan within months of the season starting, leaving all 3 competing against budgets they had never actually built a business model for. HRT folded first, in 2012, after struggling from its first race to secure stable funding. Caterham, formerly Lotus Racing, folded in 2014, entering administration despite a wealthy owner's backing. The third team, by then renamed Marussia, entered administration that same October, owing more than £31 million, mostly to its engine supplier. None of the 3 2010 entrants were still on the grid by 2017, a complete wipeout of an entire cohort of new teams, all lured in under a financial promise the sport's own governing body didn't keep. One of those 3 teams actually scored points at the sport's most famous race, on merit, against teams spending many multiples of its budget. It still didn't survive. Marussia entered F1 in 2010 as Virgin Racing, was renamed after a Russian investor took a controlling stake in 2012, and by 2014 had climbed past its fellow 2010 entrants to become a genuine backmarker success story, regularly out-qualifying and out-racing Caterham, despite a fraction of the budget of the teams above it. At the 2014 Monaco Grand Prix, driver Jules Bianchi finished 9th, scoring the team's first and only championship point, its high water mark, celebrated inside the team as proof the model could work. Months later, Bianchi suffered a catastrophic crash at the Japanese Grand Prix, and almost simultaneously, the team's finances collapsed. Marussia entered administration on October 27, 2014, owing more than £31 million, primarily to Ferrari for engine supply. Energy entrepreneur Stephen Fitzpatrick bought and rebranded the team as Manor for the 2015 season, racing largely on a modified prior year chassis. Manor finished last in the Constructors' Championship in both 2015 and 2016, which under the sport's payment structure locked it into the smallest available prize money share 2 years running. By January 2017, with no new investor found, the team entered administration again, Administrators recorded roughly £3 million owed to creditors against just £1.62 million in cash and £2.47 million in total assets. The team formally withdrew from the 2017 season in March, ending F1's entire 2010 new team experiment at 0 survivors out of 3. This was not bad management. The team scored points, kept racing through 2 administrations, rebranded, changed owners, and still couldn't escape a structure where finishing last permanently caps your revenue below your fixed costs. Talent and effort were never the missing ingredient. Cash flow was. Here's a cost that never shows up in a startup projection. Cost cap compliance overhead counts against the same capped budget it exists to police. The FIA's financial regulations explicitly require every team to fund a dedicated compliance function, accountants and reporting staff who track every dollar against the $135 million ceiling, and that staffing cost is itself inside the cap, not on top of it. Picture the transaction that looks profitable until you count it. A team allocates $2 million toward an aerodynamic upgrade package projected to gain 1/10 of a second per lap. A real, calculable performance return. But if compliance staffing and reporting infrastructure already consume $2 million of that same capped pool, the upgrade either shrinks, slips a race, or gets cut entirely. With no line item anywhere that says, "This car is slower because of accounting overhead." The cost is real. It just never appears where anyone's looking for it, and no fan watching the upgrade arrive 2 races late would ever guess the delay came from a spreadsheet, not a wind tunnel. There's another cost growing faster than any other line item in this business, and it isn't measured in dollars first. It's measured in a penalty that costs you both money and speed at the same time. That cost is a cost cap breach penalty. In 2021, Red Bull was found to have overspent its budget cap by $1.8 million, a fraction of 1% of the total, and was fined $7 million plus handed a 10% reduction in permitted wind tunnel testing time for the following year. That wind tunnel penalty is arguably the more expensive part. Less aerodynamic testing time directly slows next season's development, compounding into lost track performance that's difficult to price, but very real. Regulations allow far harsher penalties for larger breaches. A material overspend beyond roughly 5% of the cap can trigger point deductions or outright exclusion from the championship. A single accounting misclassification, caught in an annual FIA audit, can cost a team millions in fines, a full season of reduced development capacity, and in a severe case, its entire championship standing, all from one clerical dispute over how a cost was categorized. There is no equivalent penalty in almost any other industry for a bookkeeping disagreement. In Formula One, it can directly slow the product itself. Scale still helps in specific ways. Ferrari receives an additional loyalty payment of roughly 5% of the prize pool, rising toward 10% at higher revenue thresholds, purely for having competed in every season since 1950, a payment no amount of on-track performance can replicate for a newer team. Manufacturer-backed teams also gain in-house engine expertise instead of paying a customer supply contract with no technical input. But scale makes other things dramatically harder under a hard cap. A team that built its workforce during the pre-2021, uncapped era now has to fit that same headcount inside a fixed ceiling. Mercedes and Ferrari both cut hundreds of jobs to comply when the cap arrived, because a bigger factory and a bigger payroll no longer buys a bigger budget, it just eats a fixed one faster. At a certain size, the sport stops rewarding whoever spends the most and starts rewarding whoever extracts the most performance per capped dollar. A completely different discipline than the one that built Formula One for 70 years, and one that punishes legacy infrastructure almost as much as it punishes a shoestring budget. Optimistic. A midfield team spends its full $141 million cost cap efficiently, pays $12 million combined for 2 drivers and $8 million in non-cap marketing and leadership costs, for total spend of $161 million. It finishes 6th in the Constructors' Championship, earning an estimated $95 million in prize money, plus $75 million in sponsorship revenue, for total revenue of $170 million. Net profit, roughly $9 million, thin, but real, on $170 million of throughput, and enough to justify another year of investment from ownership. Realistic. Same team, same season. The primary title sponsor exits mid-year after a slow start, cutting $20 million from revenue. An FIA audit finds a $2 million cost classification error, the same category of dispute that cost Red Bull $7 million in 2021, triggering a fine and a wind tunnel time reduction that adds an estimated $5 million to next year's development bill just to offset. A power unit failure during a race weekend costs $3 million in unbudgeted replacement parts, still counted against the same capped budget. Recalculate. Revenue falls to $150 million. Effective costs rise to $166 million once the fine and offsetting development spend are counted. Net result, a loss of roughly $16 million, a $25 million swing from the optimistic case, without losing a single race the team was actually favored to win. The difference between those two scenarios is 1 lost sponsor, 1 compliance fine, and 1 mechanical failure. None of these are exotic disasters. All 3 happen to someone on this grid nearly every season. Every team that entered F1, promising an affordable new era in 2010, is gone. A 0% survival rate across 7 years for that entire generation of entrants. The documented cause, across HRT, Caterham, and Marussia Manor alike, was never driver or engineering talent. It was structural, a promised cost cap that was withdrawn, and a prize money formula that locks a poor finish into a smaller budget the following year, compounding rather than correcting the gap. Since the current hard cost cap took effect in 2021, every team on the grid has stayed solvent, a genuine structural improvement over the pre-cap era. But staying solvent and turning a real profit are 2 very different bars to clear, and 5 habits separate the ones now thriving from the ones merely surviving. They secure manufacturer power unit backing or genuine work status rather than a pure cash-only customer deal, trading some independence for technical support that doesn't disappear when a sponsor's marketing budget gets cut. They build multi-year sponsorship portfolios instead of depending on one dominant title partner who can exit after a bad start. They fund cost cap compliance as a standing function from day one, not as a reaction to an FIA audit letter. They keep non-cap spending, driver pay, marketing, executive salaries, disciplined even though no regulation forces them to. And they hold a cash reserve sized for a lost sponsor or a compliance fine, not just for a slow off-season. That champagne on the podium is paid for by a business where the sport's own $1.266 billion prize pool leaves nearly $100 million between first place and last, and where every team that bet on a promised cost cap in 2010 was gone within 7 years. Your finishing position, not your engineering, decides whether you turn a profit, and the sport's own regulations, from the anti-dilution fee to the compliance overhead buried inside the cost cap, make sure that stays true, even for the teams that get everything else right. Subscribe for the next breakdown in this series.